Can a president pardon himself? This was actually a question that people began exploring when Donald Trump was in the presidency over all the allegations at the time regarding Ukraine and the things that led to his impeachment. And there are two schools of thought. I will give you both of them. The first is that, yes, the president can pardon himself because the president has the pardon power, and the president can pardon anyone as he sees fit, and there are no restrictions on it in the Constitution. That's the basic gist of it. The second, and I think it is actually the more grounded one, is if you follow along with what the founders wrote in the Federalist Papers and the like, this is a more complicated one than to just say, well, obviously the Constitution says he has the power of pardon, so he can pardon himself. What the founders believed is that the president is the power flows from, not to, the president. When the president exercises power, that power is a release of the executive's power under the Constitution. And it goes in one direction, from the president towards someone or something. And if the president were to pardon himself, it would be the power of the president reverting back to himself, enriching himself in some way that the founders did not contemplate. Therefore, it would be unconstitutional to pardon himself. Now, I concede out of the gate. The other sounds like just a no-brainer. The Constitution says the president has the power of pardon. Therefore, the president can pardon anyone. Therefore, the president can pardon himself. It's a very easy answer. If you read the founders, however, and their understandings of presidential power, it is a unitary executive. All powers flow from the president in the executive branch. And because the power flows from the president, it always goes away from the president to something. It cannot come back on the president. Therefore, he cannot pardon himself, because it would be a power that is for other people being used for himself, and the Constitution contemplates by its structure that he can't do that. That's going to be argued about and the reason it's going to be argued about is because it's unsettled. We do not have a situation in this country where a president has thought to pardon himself. Now, the precedent is Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon did not pardon himself. He did not even try to pardon himself. And part of the issue with Richard Nixon was he was on the verge of being impeached. But also, Richard Nixon didn't pardon himself on the way out the door because the lawyers for Nixon read the structure of the Constitution into the pardon power, as I explained it, that the presidential power flows from him. It can't come back to him. And so he passed the buck to Gerald Ford, who pardoned Nixon to move the country beyond Nixon, and that power flowed from Ford to Nixon, no longer president, and worked. My guess, if this were to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, you would see Ketanji Jackson Brown, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and John Roberts agree the power of the president flows from the president, not to the president. Therefore, he can't pardon himself. And I would bet you would get probably Brett Kavanaugh to join them in a 5-4 decision. You'd probably get Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch as well, and so it would be 7-2 decision. But it's all hypothetical until it happens, and right now it's not happening. And if polling is to be believed, in Iowa, Ron DeSantis has now shot up 16 points in the past month, according to the Reuters poll there. He's still about 20 points behind the president, President Trump, but has surged 16 points. And in fact, if you look at all of the polling now, people loathe Joe Biden. They loathe Donald Trump. But if forced to pick between them, more Americans would pick Biden than Trump. So therefore, Trump won't come back to be president. Vivek Ramaswamy, who's going to be on the program on Monday, went down to Florida, to Miami. People said he was wearing a Truth Social cap. He was actually wearing a cap. His campaign, one of the slogans that they have is truth. And the graphic and design looks like Truth Social. People thought he was promoting Trump's website. He was trying to promote his own campaign. But he went down to Miami and did not. Some said he was going to drop out and endorse Trump. He did not do that. What he did do is say if he's elected, he will fully pardon President Trump. In fact, There are those behind the scenes who are trying to convey a message to Donald Trump that you would be very smart right now to get out of the race and rally behind someone who agrees publicly or privately to pardon you, because given the nature of the charges against you, it's going to be very hard to beat them. Now, you have to understand again, and I don't mean to be a broken record here, I'm just trying to explain this one to you. It does not seem to be beyond dispute. Or rather, it does seem to be beyond dispute that a grand jury requested documents with classified markings, and Donald Trump did not hand them all over, and it appears that he tried to stop his lawyers from handing them over. If that is proven in court, that's a crime, whether you or I think it should be or not, that's a crime. And so there are people trying to pursue a strategy of convincing Donald Trump, you got to drop out and find someone, hitch your wagon to someone who can win and pardon you because you're going to be found guilty. I don't think he will. I think he'll run. Whether he wins or not, he's got something to prove, and he's got a fundraise to pay his lawyer, so he's going to run. The other campaigns, though, they're starting to shift very subtly. Nikki Haley, you expect that Chris Christie is going to go out beating up Donald Trump. I didn't even get any audio of Chris Christie. You know what he's going to say, that he's a loser, he's been a loser, he's always lost, except 2016, he was a fluke, and then he's been losing ever since. He's brought this on himself. You know what Christie's going to say. Nikki Haley had a shift. Before the indictment came out, she said, this is bad, this is politicization of the justice system. But now that it's been revealed, one of the pieces of information Donald Trump apparently had, if the indictment is to be believed, one group of classified documents Donald Trump had are the classified locations of members of the American military around the world. You know, we have special operators in parts of Africa and the like that we aren't supposed to know about. We don't know where they are or what they're doing. It is alleged they are fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And Donald Trump had the documents showing where he had placed them. Nikki Haley's husband is active duty military, and he has been called back up and is going abroad. And she was on Fox News yesterday and has become a little more strident in her tone on this stuff.
When I was at the UN, I saw that the president never got an ounce of credit or a moment's peace. I also had to deal with the Russiagate because that's what they were swirling around all the time, and we saw that that was not a fact. This is what I'll tell you. Two things can be true at the same time. One, the DOJ and FBI have lost all credibility with the American people, and getting rid of just senior management isn't going to be enough to fix this. This is going to take a complete overhaul, and we have to do that. Two, the second thing can also be true. If this indictment is true, if what it says is actually the case, President Trump was incredibly reckless with our national security. More than that, I'm a military spouse. My husband's about to deploy this weekend. This puts all of our military men and women in danger if you are going to talk about what our military is capable of or how we would go about invading or doing something with one of our enemies. And if that's the case, it's reckless, it's frustrating, and it causes problems. And, you know, we're looking now, this is the second indictment. We're looking at possibly a third indictment coming in with Georgia. My concern is not so much about how this plays out and what we do with it. My concern is about the direction of the country. The fact that we cannot have Biden win this election. We cannot go through Biden or Kamala Harris winning this election. We've got to have someone that can win a general election. We've got to have someone that can right the ship on this country and get us back in shape, whether it's the border, whether it's crime. We've got to start doing that. And I think the time is now.
So Nikki Haley's shift is this is a weaponization of the judicial system, but also if the allegations are true, they're bad. They put our military in harm's way. And also he's so bogged down in this stuff that he's not going to be able to move forward. Tim Scott has now shifted as well and said something very similar, that the allegations show a level of irresponsibility on the president's part. I am reliably told that several of the campaigns are working on focus grouping and messaging to figure out a way to get through to Trump voters. Here's something, the media just wants these Republicans to go after Trump. They want these people to just beat up Trump. The media just wants to beat up Trump. They want to scratch the itch. They don't care about the strategy. These people actually want to win. Here is what we know. Go back to Brian Kemp in Georgia in 2022. Brian Kemp never punched back. When he was on the campaign trail, he never really punched back at the president. He might disagree with the president, always sounded respectful, never combative. He did not want to alienate Trump voters who he would need in the general election. And many of them, not all of them, many of them came to vote for him. You've got to have someone play it this way. They've got to praise the president for what he did, acknowledge that in this situation, it suggests some level of poor judgment on his part. And even if you don't want to do that, you pivot to, but he's going to be so bogged down and we must beat Joe Biden, there's no path forward for him. You got to be able to do that so you don't risk alienating his voters. You've got to provide them a permission structure by which they can rationalize, I love him, but I have to leave him. If you just go out and attack Trump, you don't build the permission structure for Trump's supporters to say it's not an act of disloyalty to jump to this guy. You've got to make them feel like they're not being disloyal. You got to make them feel like they're doing Trump a favor. I love Donald Trump. You got to convince them of this. You got to convince them to themselves to have this inner monologue. I love Donald Trump. To help Donald Trump, I'm going to go vote for this person who will pardon him. This is not an act of betrayal. It is, I realize that this must happen to help Donald Trump. The candidates are focus grouping and message testing to try to convey this. How do you talk to Trump voters without alienating them? To suggest to them their guy screwed himself. He's probably going to go to jail unless we beat Biden, and he can't beat Biden. How do you talk to him in that way? I don't know the answer. I find it all deeply frustrating, the way you got to coddle people sometimes, but it's all an emotional thing. We're in a postmodern time. Everybody's very emotional. Nobody thinks logically about this stuff. So how do you talk to them at an emotional level and convince them I must leave Donald Trump to help Donald Trump? And that's what the candidates, some of them I am led to believe, are testing right now. And I suspect once they find an angle, you're going to start hearing better messaging from these other candidates. Haley and Scott are the first out of the gate. I don't think they'll be the last.